Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode is actually the first of a three-parter, Green Day and Oasis, and it is just about the fight with those two stands specifically. We've already met Green Day. We sort of met Oasis already, but it wasn't specifically made clear that we had actually seen it yet. They didn't fully explain that it was indeed what we were seeing. But in case this episode does open up immediately after the last one, we're of course as we find out, Bruno had actually emerged from Coco Jumbo after he ordered Narancia to throw it. And he does so that he can tag out Narancia and so that he can get healing from Giorno. And of course now because of what Misa did with blowing up the boat, they are now safely on a higher elevation where Green Day will no longer be able to affect them. And they then proceed to climb, and of course Misa points out the very obvious problem in that they obviously can't get back to the boat. And obviously the boat's been blown up and they can't return back to the ocean. But of course Bruno points out that that's actually a good thing, pointing out that obviously since that's at a lower elevation they would have grown mold. But he does point out that obviously because of the way that Green Day works, they're not going to be able to get close to the stand user and actually go fight him. They have to figure out another way to do that. But of course, they quickly realize that first and foremost they need to find a higher elevation so that they can get out of the village. And upon looking around, Bruno eventually spies a car lot on the top on an upper elevation and up a flight of stairs. And he points out that most likely is where they're going to need to go, and points out that looking at another car that's actually leaving the village from the hill where he can see it, he points out that obviously it seems like the mold hasn't spread to outside the village yet, and if people are able to go in and out of the village, or at least go out of it, that it's probably safe for them to leave that way. And of course, Bruno immediately asks Giorno how Narancia's wounds are actually doing, and Giorno gives him a very predictable answer about the fact how he's patching up Narancia the best he can, but obviously because there's living mold in his wounds, it's making it difficult. But of course, Bruno does tell him to keep on it, and points out in the meantime that they're going to find a way out of the village. And Trish hears all of this and points out that Bruno is kind of a bit of a cruel person. And points out that he's very cold, and does point out where she's coming from. And of course, Giorno and Narancia both look at her a little funny, and she does explain her reasoning about how obviously Bruno is very much a cold and seems like a very cold and distant person. He doesn't seem to care about any of the people under his charge. He's just very concerned with doing his job, and that's about it. And sure enough, she does point out the fact that obviously he told Narancia to throw the turtle, and without any regards to Narancia's safety, and also proceeds to point out that obviously he didn't check to see if Narancia was okay. He just asked, are Narancia's wounds healed? He doesn't ask Narancia if he's okay. He just asked if the wounds were healed. And she does point out that seems like he's that does make him a little bit of a distant person, and points out that obviously she doesn't feel like he connects with them on the same as people. That's very much where she's coming from. She points that out, but to this point where Narancia does point out that yes, all of that is true, but she also points out that she doesn't really know Bruno all that well. She points out that that's very much the kind of person he is, and does point out that he does care in his way. But also points out, and very obviously, that it was in fact his fault. He jumped into the boat like an idiot without actually realizing that how the mold works first, and because of that, they almost died. And if Bruno hadn't ordered him to throw the turtle, then obviously they probably would all have died. He very much points that out. He points out that obviously because he was reckless, he almost endangered the entire team. And wonders aloud if obviously he points out he's not a girl, he doesn't know how girls think, but he does ask if she was specifically asking if Trish was okay, which Trish becomes a little confused about, and also kind of asks Narancia in an accusatory tone what he means, but of course Narancia just points out that obviously she's not going, that obviously there's more things she's going to worry about, and obviously she points out that seems like she has some unresolved feelings for Bruno about how the fact that he saved her, and she doesn't really know how to respond to his presence anymore, and he does proceed to point out that maybe by the time they get to Rome, she'll have worked out what her feelings for him and be able to actually figure out how to properly thank him. But for the time being, he just points out that he needs to rest up and heal his wounds. So for the time being, he's just going to go to sleep and wait and heal and work off his wounds. And of course, Trish does indeed start thinking about what Narancia has said, and it's at this point where she does kind of take what Narancia says to heart. But in case as this is happening, Cioccolata and Secco actually are watching the whole thing about watching Bruno and the others actually escape, and he does kind of start spouting off his philosophy about how he thinks life works, about how about how he explains those who embrace their curiosity he obviously believes are going to evolve and become stronger, and he points out that because humans specifically are able to ponder their own existence, are able to not only evolve and change their environment, but be completely aware of the fact that they're doing it. He points out that humans are the most curious creatures of all, and points out that obviously he does think about how he does openly think about the fact that obviously he thinks that's because they're the most curious of all. He points out that obviously he feels like there's more curiosity to be gleaned from the fact that people that killing people can actually bring. That's very much the kind of person he is. Obviously, he reveals in this moment that his philosophy is the reason he kills people, the reason he did malpractice on purpose, was because he wants to see what the reactions would be when they died. He wanted to see how they would react to the fact that they're dying in front of him, and of course he then proceeds to, also after spouting this philosophy to the audience, he then proceeds to turn to Secco and asks him if he got all the footage of them with their faces of anguish, and Secco does in fact reveal on his camcorder that he didn't get a picture of Narancia's suffering face, and of course what we find out is that Secco can speak. It's established in the episode that he can speak if he absolutely has to, but mostly he just communicates with Cioccolata through a series of grunts and animal noises. And what we find out is that Secco is very much treated by Cioccolata as a human pet. It's very much established, and what we find out is that Cioccolata is very affectionate of Secco. Case in point, when he finds out that Secco got the picture, the film of the heroes looking on in pure anguish and horror, his immediate response is to give Secco vigorous head pats, and then asks him if you want, and then proceeds to actually give him a big hug and continuously pet him, and praises him, calling him a good boy, and a whole bunch of other things you would call your animal and your pet. And Secco just kind of lets him. He's very much seems like he's the kind of guy, he very much enjoys being treated like a pet by Cioccolata. Secco's very open about the fact that he very much likes the fact that Cioccolata treats him like a pet. And of course, Cioccolata then proceeds to point out that obviously he needs to figure out a way to actually deal with the heroes, pointing out that obviously if they figured out how his Green Day works, he's going to have to get creative and figure out a way to actually deal with them. But as he's actually mulling this over, Secco then proceeds to start making grunting noises, and Cioccolata wonders what Secco wants, but then realizes that Secco wants sugar cubes, and this moment is mostly to just showcase Secco's interesting ability to spit. As we quickly find out, Secco has a very accurate ability to spit, and he proceeds, and case in point, Secco catches 2 of the 3, but Cioccolata accidentally throws a 3rd one out of reach where he can actually get it. So Secco uses one of the sugar cubes he currently has in his mouth to bounce the sugar cube, the third sugar cube, back into his range so he can catch it in his mouth, and then he proceeds to eat all three. And of course Cioccolata proceeds to praise Secco for his neat little trick, and then proceeds to tell Secco that he wants him to actually go and deal with the people who are currently trying to escape the village and get out of the village. And he does proceed to sick Secco and his Oasis on the group. And what we find, and what is kind of revealed in this moment is that apparently, and this is similar to White Album, but except it's not summoned. But the way Secco's stand Oasis is established to work is that it's a suit, and that he's just wearing it. It's very much, I've already shown it. It's very much a part of his outfit, but he is just wearing his stand. Not like White Album in the sense that it has to be summoned and then it becomes a suit, but it's already a suit. It's the thing he wears over his body, and it very much resembles a snake skin, and I like that. But in any case, with that, Secco then proceeds to go off and go engage the group. Meanwhile, Bruno, and Misa are currently working their way up the village. Bruno is currently carrying Coco Jumbo in his arms with all of his teammates inside, and at one point they do climb up a flight of stairs, and Misa asks if it's going to be safe for them to actually get out of the village, but of course Bruno does proceed to point out that obviously since the only ways in and out of the village are all uphill, it's most likely going to be fine. They're not going to have to worry about Green Day or anything else, but it does point out that they should be able to get to a car no problem. But it's at this point where they actually walk past what was a drunk. He's currently being eaten away by the mold, and he's currently still holding the 6-pack of beers that he bought, and it's dangling from his now decaying fingers. But of course Bruno points out that as long as they don't touch the mold, they'll probably be fine, and they do proceed to walk past him on the staircase, and of course, there's at one point where one of the fingers winds up decaying, and the beer can winds up falling out of his hand and down to below the stairs. And Bruno immediately has a reaction to it and immediately summons Sticky Fingers, but eventually realizes that it was just the guy's fingers falling apart and dropping the beer, and that it's most likely fine. But the two then proceed to continue to work their way up the stairs again, but then the guy drops another beer because of his decaying fingers, and it doesn't make a sound when it hits the bottom, which immediately catches Bruno as odd. And of course, he quickly tells Misa to continue hurrying up the stairs, pointing out that obviously he may have been mistaken about the fact that it was in fact safe, and tells Misa to hurry to the car as fast as he can. And then to continue to test his theory, he then proceeds to kick the last can of beer down the stairs himself. And once again, it doesn't make a sound when it hits the bottom. Which, of course, Misa is looking at all of this, and at which point Bruno immediately yells at him to continue to go up the stairs because he very much realizes they're not safe now. And of course, Misa points out that he's trying to get up the stairs, but they're not working, and eventually we do find out why. As it turns out, it's not explained until later, but Oasis somehow is sinking the staircase into the ground, and this quote quickly reveals that the staircase is actually getting farther away from the wall where they originally had the staircase attached to, and the staircase is just kind of slowly sinking in the ground. And of course, when Misa tries to draw his gun to actually try and fight back against whatever it is that's going on, it winds up dropping it, and because obviously the staircase is constantly shifting, and he winds up dropping it, and it winds up sinking into the staircase, which of course then proceeds to strike them as odd, and they do eventually figure out why the staircase seems to be shrinking. As they find out, it's not so much the fact that the staircase is sinking into the ground, but the staircase itself has become like a liquid and is slowly sinking into the ground itself like rubber, and is slowly falling apart and like a liquid. And of course, when Bruno tries to go and fight back against whatever it is that's underneath them, realizing very quickly that there's an alternate stand there that's currently trying to fight them, he immediately tries to summon Sticky Fingers, but winds up sinking into the ground. And when Bucciarati tries to actually punch the staircase to try and get to the stand user, he quickly finds out that while he's sinking into the ground, the staircase itself is still very much solid, and that causes Bruno to kind of think through what kind of stand they're facing. And Misa, quickly realizing that he needs to do something to get Bruno out of the ground, he resummons his stand. He resummons Sex Pistols, which, as it turns out, are not affected by the mold. As we find out, stands are not affected by the mold at all. If they sink under the ground, they are fine. And of course, Misa has to do that because obviously he can't lower his hand. He actually tries that. He winds up hurting his hand trying to grab his gun, but he literally just winds up growing mold on himself, so he decides to stop. But he quickly finds out that his ability to actually resummon his stand is actually very useful, and that he can actually regain his gun from a lower elevation if he loses it using his stand. So yeah, because of that, he's able to resummon Sex Pistols and resummon his revolver, and proceeds to shoot a lamp sign, which he then uses to actually grab onto the stand, onto the sign and pull Bucciarati free, and at which point they then proceed to deposit their theories about how this new stand seems to work. And of course we do see this, but what we find out is that Oasis enables Secco to just swim in the ground like it's a liquid. That's its main power. If it's in contact with him, it will turn into a liquid, and everybody will just sink into the ground. And of course, he very much uses that to swim through it as if it were a liquid, when in actuality it is just a solid. He's able to turn, and obviously he can turn this ability on and off as needed, but but the way it works is that he's just able to swim through the ground, and that's how he was actually attacking Bucciarati and Misa. He was swimming inside of the staircase. And because it was currently in contact with him, they just started sinking into the ground and being unable to fight back against him. And of course, Bucciarati quickly realizes that these two are actually the most in sync pair of stand users that they've ever seen before, because obviously their abilities very much complement one another. Obviously, you've got Cioccolata, whose mold grows whenever somebody goes to a lower elevation. And then you've got Secco, who can accelerate that process and is himself immune to the mold. His suit winds up being a protective suit that enables him to be completely immune to the mold, because obviously mold doesn't grow on stands, and his stand covers the entire length of his body except for parts of his face. More so when he uncovers himself, but it does cover most of his body, and most of his body is safe from the mold. So for that reason he's immune. But yeah, of course because of that, the two are completely in sync and are very difficult to deal with. And of course, Misa does make a comment about the fact that they seem to be connected by the red thread of fates, but does quickly point out that obviously he does point out that that's a problem, but and does conclude that they're going to need to get out of the city as quickly as possible. And of course, they do eventually climb their way up the wall and to safety. Or at least they try to. But Secco quickly realizes that that's what they're doing, and immediately runs into the wall where they're currently trying to climb up, and starts dissolving it. And of course, Bucciarati quickly realizes that he needs to get the two of them to safety, so he uses sticky fingers to create a zipper and pulls them up onto the wall. And of course, this causes them to realize that they need to actually find a way to deal with Secco, because obviously, they do wind up finding the car and wind up finding the key that they need, no problem, but they quickly realize that if Secco is currently tailing them, they're going to have to find a way to stall for time until they can actually start the car. And of course, Misa is the first to quickly realize this. He's the first to realize, I need to stall for time so that Bucciarati can get back to the car and start it. And sure enough, proceeds to stand his ground and tells Bucciarati to hurry up and start the car, but and proceeds to pull out his gun, but quickly realizes that because the ground is only a liquid when Secco is in contact with it, it just bounces off, and Bucciarati even tells Misa that. He points out that obviously because of how this Oasis is established to work, Misa isn't going to be able to hit him. And Misa quickly realizes this. He quickly realizes that if his bullets are just going to bounce off and ricochet, he's going to have to figure out a way he's going to have to wait until the exact moment that Secco reveals himself to actually hit him. And of course, he points out that Secco's Oasis is obviously a close-range stand, because it only works in a very localized area. It has a very limited range where it's only able to affect the things affect the ground that's currently touching him, and and of course only the nearby areas. So of course he quickly realizes that if it is indeed a close range power type, he's going to have to figure out he's going to have to wait until the exact moment Secco pops his head up to grab Misa. And sure enough, that exact thing happens. Secco swims through the ground. He eventually does manage to grab Misa, and it's at this point where Misa winds up opening fire on him. And of course, Secco had actually prepared for this, and I did explain his spitting ability earlier. I did explain his spitting ability earlier, and it does come into question important here, because as it turns out, Secco is able to eat ground because of how his stand works. He is able to pull it in as if it's a liquid, and as I explained, it has to be in contact with him for it to stay a liquid. So the end result of that is that Secco is able to eat ground and then spit it back out, and it will turn back into a solid form, but after he spits it, which will enable him to reflect things and create deadly projectiles. And he uses this fact to actually redirect Sex Pistols back into Misa and injure his leg, which of course Misa points out is obviously a problem, and does point out that obviously he should have been prepared for the fact that of course Secco is a close range power type. Obviously, he would have some sort of ability that would enable him to defend himself. But does point out that the way that it works the other way around. If Secco is able to redirect his bullets, then of course Misa can do the exact same thing with his Sex Pistols, and does proceed to actually use Sex Pistols to redirect the bullets back into the back of Secco's head. But by this point, Secco has quickly realized that Misa is actually trying to shoot him with Sex Pistols, and immediately retreats back into the ground, and then proceeds to change targets entirely, and proceeds to go right back, and proceeds to go directly at Bucciarati, which Misa reasons is because obviously Misa is injured now. Obviously Secco thinks he can finish him off at any time, so he leaves to go take on Bucciarati, who he thinks is the bigger threat. And of course Misa immediately warns Bucciarati to get out of there and to start the car, but then is thrown for a loop when Bucciarati instead runs off the side of the car lot, and Secco proceeds to follow him. And what we find out is that, very much like an animal, Secco has excellent tracking abilities and has been established to be able to see where everybody is going, or rather, he can hear where everybody is. Not so much see. He can hear and smell them, but he can't see them. And Bucciarati quickly takes that into account and quickly realizes that that's a major weakness he can exploit, because he immediately jumps off the wall, which of course causes Misa to get completely confused, because obviously he thinks the mold is going to get Bucciarati, but of course, for some reason it doesn't, and Bucciarati does indeed explain why later. But of course he immediately jumps over the edge of the car lot, and it does take into the fact that Secco can't actually see where he's going. He can sense where everybody is, but he can't see where he's going, and quickly takes that into account, because Secco eventually emerges from the wall that Bucciarati jumps over, and eventually Bucciarati does reveal that now that he knows where Secco is, he can easily hit him, and summons Sticky Fingers and proceeds to actually just pummel Secco in the face, which Secco does panic and immediately retreats back into the ground, but he does start panicking because he doesn't quickly realizes that that's a very big problem, and he starts panicking about the fact that he got hit in the face, and as Bruno and eventually gets back to the car, but and he does start panicking, and also films the whole thing for Cioccolata's research, but then he immediately calls up Cioccolata, who is annoyed about the fact that obviously Secco is calling him when he's supposed to be taking care of the enemy, and Cioccolata mentions this several times, but Secco does call him to ask him a very important question, which and of course Cioccolata doesn't really understand why Secco is calling him to ask this in the middle of what is supposed to be a fight, but Secco does point out that this is obviously a very important thing and that he needs to know an answer to this. And then he proceeds to bring up Notorious Big, and proceeds to point out that obviously it is a dead stand. The way it works is that it's a pure posthumous stand that can grow and absorb matter and whatever else after the user has died. That is its main power. After the user dies, it becomes a posthumous stand that is able to attack everything in its vicinity. That is very much what it's established to be. And And of course, Cioccolata doesn't know why Secco is asking about this, but Secco insists that that's important and tells Cioccolata and asks Cioccolata if Green Day's mold would actually grow on Notorious Big, because obviously it is a dead stand. It is not alive, but. And Secco doesn't, and Secco, of course, and of course, Cioccolata doesn't fully understand why Secco's asking him this, but does point out that obviously he has no idea since he's never had the misfortune of actually fighting Notorious Big, but does point out that his mold only works on living creatures, and obviously if it's a rock or whatever, if it's a rock or whatever else, if it's not alive, Green Day does not affect it, and Secco does point out that is exactly what he was worried about, and does proceed to point out that by this point they've actually escaped the city, and Cioccolata takes notice of that. But of course Secco then proceeds to point out to Cioccolata that what was interesting is that Bucciarati wound up fighting him and wound up hitting him in the face. But what's in, and that's obviously not very surprising. He points out that obviously he expected to get hit if he was fighting somebody. But what he found interesting is that Bucciarati, for some reason, was able to jump downhill to trick Secco into coming out of hiding, and that's how Secco got pummeled. And this of course causes Cioccolata to finally realize the concern that Secco is trying to bring up to him. That for some reason Bruno is immune to the mold, and there's no reasonable explanation for that. And of course, Cioccolata quickly realizes that now he's going to have to actually figure out why Bruno is actually immune to the mold. So, and of course, the two of them immediately just have to regroup and find out that question together. And of course, meanwhile, Giorno has actually emerged from Coco Jumbo, and is currently tending to Mista's wounds, and of course Mista asks this very same question about the fact that obviously Bruno should have been affected by the mold, and is very happy that he didn't, but also wonders how Bruno was able to actually survive getting affected by the mold, and does try to ask a couple of questions about how Bruno did it, such as using sticky fingers to create a zipper for him to hang on, but of course Bruno is just kind of stonewalling him, and isn't really answering any of his questions. And of course, eventually Mista realizes that he's not going to be able to get answers out of Bruno, and it's at this point where Giorno asks him to sleep, pointing out that obviously his wounds are still fresh. He's going to have to actually rest up and heal himself, because obviously if he moves too much, that the wounds are going to open again, and Mista is just going to injure himself again. So he very much tells Mista to go back to sleep, and tells him to rest up, and Mista does that. And of course, the two of them are completely asleep. And of course, he's now completely asleep. Bruno is trying to drive, and Giorno sitting in the back seat with Mista. And also Trish is currently in the turtle with Narancia, trying to figure out trying to make sure that he's all right and taking good care of him. And to this point, where of course Giorno eventually notices that Bruno has a very big chunk taking out of his arm, and doesn't seem to be affected. Doesn't seem to even notice it. And of course, Giorno's immediate concern is Bruno is injured. I need to heal him. And immediately starts asking several questions about how Bruno's arm wound up getting injured. But also notices that something strange is going on. That something strange is going on with Bruno, and tries to reach over to him to try and heal him, but. Then Bruno winds up hitting a pothole, and Giorno winds up accidentally touching Bruno's main vein in his neck instead. And what he quickly discovers is that Bruno doesn't have a pulse and is cold to the touch, which of course causes Giorno to become very concerned, and he has no idea what exactly is going on, and immediately starts panicking to himself, and eventually he does start putting two and two together, and starts realizing that this is the exact same thing that he had seen back on the island. He quickly realizes that he feels like that he's quickly realizing that something strange has been happening to Bruno, and he has no idea what it is. Obviously, he's noticed that Bruno has taken several injuries. He's somehow been completely oblivious to the fact that any of them have been injured in the first place, and notices that Bruno has just been kind of completely ignoring them and hasn't really been feeling anything. But and of course, this causes it's at this point where Giorno does start bringing all of these up, and Bruno isn't really hearing Giorno, but then proceeds to turn to Giorno and points out that he couldn't hear him. and then proceeds to reveal what exactly it is that's happened to him. He then proceeds to explain how he started to lose sensation in his hands and legs and everything else, but then questions whether he ever had any sensation to begin with, and then proceeds to reveal what happened to him. About how the fact that when Gold Experience actually wound up healing him, he wound up restoring some of Bruno's life energy, and he's currently just running on reserves of what's left. And of course, Giorno has no idea what's going on, pointing out that obviously Bruno should have been healed. He's pointing out that he should have healed all of his wounds and he should have been completely fine. But of course, Bruno then proceeds to reveal that the way Gold Experience works is that I can only heal living things, and he then proceeds to explain that he's been dead for a while. He points out that when he went to save Trish, and this has been implied, but when he went to save Trish, King Crimson did in fact kill him, and by the time Gold Experience started patching up his wounds, Bruno was already dead. He was already very much dead, and he does explain that to Giorno. And Giorno, of course, can't accept this fact, pointing out that obviously he feels like there's something more he can do, but Bruno then does proceed to explain that obviously there's nothing he can do, and then asks Giorno not to tell anybody. He tells them to just leave this information secret between the two of them, and points out that obviously the rest of the group doesn't need to know about this. And of course, it's at this point where they actually do stop having this bit of a revelation about when they actually wind up hearing some sort of strange noise, and they have no idea where, and neither of them know where it's coming from. Obviously, Giorno is listening around and is trying to look for a car, but he doesn't see a car. But obviously, they still hear a noise, and of course, Bruno points out that he's obviously hearing something, but he's not seeing anything. And it's at this point it's revealed why they're not seeing anything, because suddenly from above them, a cadaver just kind of falls out of nowhere and lands on the windshield and breaks it, and then they quickly realize that there's actually a mold, that it's actually covered in Cioccolata's mold, and they quickly panic because they realize that now they've been infected and they need to stop, but they also quickly realize that they're heading for a downhill climb, and they quickly realize they need to stop and get out of the vehicle, and it's at this point where Bruno has Giorno wake up Mista, and then proceeds to use sticky fingers to eject them from the car so that they can actually get out. He creates a zipper that they climb out of, and then he grabs the sound barriers on the roads. He grabs one of those. I'm not entirely sure, but they do wind up making it to Rome, but they wind up grabbing a sound barrier, or whatever it's called, one of those. Like, he winds up grabbing either a curb or a sound barrier or one of those things. He winds up grabbing one of those, and he creates a zipper on it, and that proceeds to stop them from going downhill. And they quickly start looking around and quickly realize what they're actually seeing, and quickly discover that Cioccolata is currently in a helicopter, and he's currently flying around, and is currently spreading his mold everywhere. And of course, Green Day is very much just activating its mold and just spreading it everywhere. And they quickly realize that that's a problem because they're currently in Rome, which is a very heavily populated city. And of course, sure enough, right on cue, Mista looks around. He sees that a woman has actually succumbed to the mold, and her boyfriend or husband or whoever immediately realizes he needs to go find a doctor and immediately go save her. But Mista tells him not to go that way, but he's of course not listening, and immediately runs off to go find a doctor and winds up succumbing to the mold himself and collapsing. And sure enough, we see surrounding everywhere that everybody is collapsing to the mold. They're all dying. They all look around. So they quickly see that there's people on the balconies who climb out. They collapse and succumb to the mold. There's other people on the streets who are currently succumbing to the mold and dying. And of course, Mista quickly realizes that this is a problem because obviously they're very close to the Roman Colosseum. They're where their ally is supposed to be. They're about to meet their ally, of course. And he's currently just in the Roman Colosseum, and they quickly realize that, of course, Cioccolata, at the rate that the mold is spreading, it'll eventually reach the Colosseum and kill whoever is in there that they're trying to meet with. And of course, they quickly realize that they're going to need to find a way to actually stop the mold from spreading. And of course, they quickly realize that the best way to do this is to actually deal with Cioccolata directly, and quickly realize that they're going to have to find a way to stop Cioccolata before his mold spreads. And it's at this point where Giorno quickly realizes why Green Day is so dangerous, because as it turns out, its stand user has no limiter. It's just normally. The way Giorno explains it is that normally stands have the potential to be as deadly as they can be. They have the potential to be some of the most dangerous things in this entire franchise. Obviously, we've established stuff like Killer Queen and Killer Queen and Purple Haze and a couple of others that are extremely dangerous. But of course, the thing is that there is indeed a limit to who they will and will not kill. There's very much a limit to who they will and will not try and attack. For example, obviously, Kira did not attack, and he would not attack his own father. And of course, and would also not just go on a killing spree if he had to, because obviously he decided to pretend to be he decided to pretend to be Mr. Family Man to hide from the heroes for a little bit. He pretended to be somebody else, and to not blow his cover, he decided not to kill some people, or at least for a while. But and then you also have Purple Haze, which was of course Fugo's stand, and Fugo is one of the good guys, so he only ever used his stand as a last resort. He was only ever used in one fight only. He never attacked anybody else. He tried very, very much not to attack anybody unless he absolutely had to. But Cioccolata, of course, has no limit to this. He very much will kill just pretty much anybody who gets in he has to in order to defeat the heroes. And of course they quickly realize that if there are indeed any organization members inside of Rome, if there are any members of Passion that are currently being affected by the mold, obviously Cioccolata is just not going to care. He's just going to kill anybody in his way, and in order to actually take down the heroes. And Giorno quickly realizes that because Cioccolata has no limit, this makes Green Day a very deadly stand. Not so much because of its ability. Obviously, it's very like all the other stands in this series. It's very situational. If you know how it works, you're not going to be beaten by it. But the fact that Cioccolata is just indiscriminately attacking civilians and is able to do that en masse, that's what makes Green Day dangerous. Not so much the ability itself, but the fact that he's just doesn't give a shit. But in any case, they quickly realize that they're going to need to take down the helicopter, and of course Bruno immediately asks Mista if he can actually reach the helicopter with his stand, and of course he quickly realizes that it should be well within the pistol's range and well within Sex Pistol's range as well. So he immediately fires his entire volley of bullets at the helicopter, but they're quickly stopped by Secco, who is currently on the helicopter and then proceeds to jump out of the helicopter and into the ground below. And he does kind of do a little bit of a sploosh because he activates his ability immediately. But he winds up climbing inside and winds up swinging around and winds up sinking their legs into the ground. And of course Mista quickly realizes that they knew that they were going to try to attack with Sex Pistols, because obviously Secco was on guard for that. He defended against that and immediately jumped into the ground after him. And of course Cioccolata quickly comments on that, pointing out that obviously now Secco is on the move, and now that they're cornered and they're not going to be able to escape. But especially since obviously the two stands create a very deadly combination where Green Day is affected by people being at a higher or lower elevation, and then there's also the fact that Secco can make people go into a lower elevation without them having to. So they quickly realize. So he quickly points out that the two are cornered, that he's now going to be able to finally finish them off. But of course Giorno quickly points out that obviously they're going to need to try again. But of course Mista points out that obviously they're not going to be able to. He knows his range better than anybody else, because obviously it's a long-range stand designed to work with a gun. He knows better than anybody else that his stand is not going to be able to reach them. But of course Giorno tells him that they won't know if they try, and then proceeds to help Mista with his aim by grabbing his hand. And of course Mista then proceeds to fire again. And of course they miss, but then Giorno reveals that actually they didn't miss. And of course, what we find out is that Giorno actually combined his Sex Pistols with Gold Experience to create branches that just pins Cioccolata's helicopter in place, and it is now tied to one of the taller buildings in the area. They wound up hitting a building by accident and wound up creating branches that ensnared Cioccolata's helicopter, so now he's no longer able to escape. And of course, this is this one where he realizes now that Mista and Misa and Jorna are going to have to go off on their own to actually go and deal with him. While and then ask Bucciarati if he's able to actually handle Secco on his own. And of course, this is as Secco is emerging from the ground and is about to actually attack them. And of course, Bruno does eventually give them his blessing and tells them to go on their merry way while he holds Secco off. And with that, the episode ends. So yeah, of course, this episode does wind up finally revealing the big reveal that, of course, Bruno has been dead this whole time. He's been dead for, like, the better part of the second half of the series. He's been dead since he went to go betray the boss and wound up being killed by King Crimson. That was implied, but never fully explained. And now this episode has finally revealed that is indeed what's going on. Obviously, Bucciarati has been dead for a while, and he knows that. He knows he's on borrowed time. He knows it's only a matter of time before he finally succumbs to all of his injuries and all the other things. And eventually his life will, in fact, his extended life, I should mention, he has already met his untimely demise, but he will in fact be able to stick out the rest of the mission, at least until he winds up collapsing and winds up succumbing to his injuries. It'll take a while because obviously he's still got a bit left to go and he's still got some of Gold Experience's life energy still coursing through him, but that is eventually going to run out and he is eventually going to finally die. But yeah, he will eventually die. He will eventually pass on, but for the time being, he's there to actually help out with the rest of the team and actually deal with the rest of the group and help the rest of the group to finish their mission. So for the time being, he's just kind of helping out. But also Green Day and Oasis make a very deadly combination. Obviously, you've got one that is elevation based, and depending on how high or how low somebody is, they will start growing mold. And then also Oasis just is able to accelerate that by sticking people under the ground. But Of course, it is a very interesting combination of those two, and I do like that idea. The fact that they are just so in sync that they work well together that is a very interesting idea. Obviously, we've had teams of antagonists before, but not to this level of in sync. These two are very in sync and are very able to work together, and I am interested to see how this is going to work out for the heroes. Obviously, they're going to have to deal with both Cioccolata and Secco. And obviously, they're going to have to try and figure out a way to actually deal with both of them. But for the time being, yeah, that's my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What'd you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, and thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to go check this out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then make sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!